Welcome to the Rogue Startups Podcast, where two startup founders are sharing lessons learned and pitfalls to avoid in their online businesses. And now, here's Dave and Craig.
All right, welcome to Rogue Startups, episode 183. Craig, how are you today?
Man, I'm good. I have a ton of stuff going on right now, but it's that good busy where you're like really productive and have a lot of irons in the fire and a lot of people working towards the same goals. So it's good, but it's nerve-wracking and stressful at the same time. So I'm good stressed right now.
Good stressed. I like that. Okay.
Yeah. How about yourself?
I am just stressed. You know, the freelance client is causing me consternation, which I, can't really talk about in great detail, but suffice it to say, they're not terribly organized. There's a lot of political backstabbing going on in there, and it's always been a little like that, but like it's full on fucking Game of Thrones there now. And, I'm feeling a little like Jon Snow. Not quite Ned Stark. They haven't beheaded me, but I'm definitely getting screwed over and, ostracized off to the wall. And, it's not making me very happy. But, it still is a substantial part of my income. So I kind of have to put up with it for the time being. Yeah. But I am looking at other options at the moment. So...
other options like not consulting?
Well, other options like different freelancing clients.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, trying to find something. Not quite at a spot where I can do that yet, although Recapture did have an absolutely fantastic month, and it was probably our biggest month of growth to date. So that was really awesome.
Cue the applause.
Cue the applause. There's tons of customers that are signing up. We're probably seeing about 10 signups a day now, roughly.
Nice.
And of those, we're getting a pretty significant number of them converting into paid accounts. And the ones that aren't converting into paid accounts, there's usually like pretty solid reasons why they're not paid, like they're just not making any money on their store. So I can't really help them at that point. So the ones that are converting to paid are good. The ones that aren't converting to paid, they're not in a position for being helped. So that's, in a weird way, that's good. That means that I'm not doing something wrong to screw it up. And so, it seems like the channel is working in the Shopify App Store.
Awesome.
So I'm kind of pleased about that. I've been trying to dig into other reasons, like, is there specific things going on with the growth and the keywords and yada, yada, the positioning in the Shopify App Store, stuff like that. And just trying to figure out, is there a better way I can instrument that? And the bad news is there isn't a good way to instrument that. They just give you the Google Analytics, the code that you can put in there, not the JavaScript code, but just the little thing, the ID that says, here's my Google Analytics account. Yep. That's all they give you. That's all you can have them put on the page. There's a couple of other trackers you can put on the page. But, what I would really like to do is throw on something like Crazy Egg or Mixpanel or Kissmetrics, but they don't exist anymore. Something like that, to be able to actually see what the hell they're doing on the page, what's engaging them, what's not. I can't see any of that. And the e-commerce stuff that I was looking into last week for Google Analytics, it's not the right fit. It doesn't, I can't, well, first of all, I can't enable it. Like, enabling it means that I have to like generate events, and I don't have access to any of the JavaScript on that page to fire an event when they do certain stuff. So it's more like I have to do like post App Store engagement with that. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to do that through Google Analytics, I'd rather do it through something else because the funnel stuff in Google Analytics is just not as polished as something like Mixpanel. Or even like Profitwell, or even something like userlist.io. I was seriously considering, like, should I just migrate to userlist.io and have them do like all of my onboarding stuff and then have that more event triggered? But that's like a lot more work for me to do right now. And so, I don't know that that's the right move at the moment. But that's where things are with Recapture.
Man, those are good problems to have, though, right? You're growing. You want to figure out why attribution is a tough thing, especially within a marketplace, because you don't control the whole world that you're living in. But
right,
that's I a bit would just kind of take it and run with it and try to do as much as you can with the surge you're seeing, because you're probably never going to get a complete picture of it. I mean, even like we're trying to get some better data around what's going on with Castos growth right now, and understand where some customers are coming from, and it's just like, yeah, it's not complete, and then like the numbers never add up. Like the numbers should all add up to be 0 or 100 or whatever it is, and they never add up. So it's like you have to take a little bit with a grain of salt and just say, yep, we can get like 50% or 80% marketing attribution, and then the rest is just stuff that happens on the internet. And that's just terrible to say, but that's
maybe a grain of salt that could desiccate a water buffalo. I mean,
yeah.
this is stuff that, it's, I mean, I think it always seems like everybody else has this way more dialed in than anybody I've ever talked to. But when you get down and actually have conversations with people, they're like, oh, well, we sort of know, but we don't totally know.
Yeah.
I talked to guys like Lars Lofgren, and he knows. I mean, he definitely has it all down. But I mean, I think he spends 24/7 on this. I think he's at the gym. He has an iPad, and he's sitting there like crunching numbers while he's like on the treadmill or lifting weights or something. I mean, he's just a really intense guy, and I see him doing that. I feel like Ruben knows, but he spends a lot of time in it too. And I'm just not spending enough time in it to get the same things out of it that they're doing. So, I feel like there's a gap that needs to be traversed there. And I'm not sure how to get across it, aside from just, becoming as intense as Lars Lofgren, which isn't going to happen for me. So
yeah, I mean, I especially with Lars, there is a scale difference there that is not insignificant, right? I mean, he's spending hundreds of times the amount of dollars and time, people hours that you're spending on it. So having the money or having the time and the resources to get the accurate data, because the amount of money he's spending is so much more important. I mean, I think for you and I to say like, yeah, I wish I knew a little bit better where my leads are coming from is kind of important. But for the couple $1,000s we might be spending on marketing in a month, like how much is all of that effort really going to pay off? Not to sell ourselves short, but practicality.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, Lars is dealing with a volume of data that's coming through his site on I Will Teach You to Be Rich, and then previously on Kissmetrics, where you and I would love to have that kind of fire hose of data, because then you can start to segment it off and run experiments and do little A/B tests and still get like massive volume going through that, and you can get statistical confidence really quickly. But for somebody that's like me with reCAPTCHA or even the plugins, I gotta wait a month for a test to complete. And I'm hearing from other people in my mastermind group, hey, you gotta run more tests, you gotta run them faster. And I'm like, my P level isn't there until I run it for a month. I just don't have that much data. Like if I run a test for a week and it starts to show a little bit of a lift, that could easily turn south in 3 more weeks. And I've seen this it has turned south. There's like the what's it called? The newness factor. Mm-hmm. There's some better name for it. But basically it's the fact that you've changed something on the site and everybody's like, ooh, hey, different. And then after a while it wears off. Novelty effect. That's it right there. The novelty effect. Yeah, and it wears off. Like you'll get an initial bump, but then over time it drops off. And so, I've had some A/B tests that have run. We've done something that looks like it has this initial bump, and after the first week or two, it looks okay, and then after that, it just goes away. You're like, what? What?
Yep.
That's the novelty effect. Yeah, so you got to watch for that stuff, and it's tough. But when you have a big enough volume of data, you can weed that out really fast.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. From our end, I guess our big update for me was I was in the U.S. last week at the first Tiny Seed retreat, which was awesome. It was cool to be able to get to meet the rest of the founders and the companies that I hadn't met before, which was most of them. It was really cool. We spent pretty much 3 full days together just talking shop the whole time, which was awesome and exhausting. It was kind of like a little tiny microconf or something maybe, because at the end of it, all of us were just like, first terribly hungover after the party the last night, but also just like, there's so many things going on in our heads about our businesses and what we thought when we came here and what we think now, after talking about this for a couple of days with, a lot of people that are really smart and know what they're talking about, to try and suss out like, okay, when I get back home on Monday, what am I going to do? I think has been a little challenging for all of us because there's so much. Yeah, that's the fire hose of knowledge and perspective and opinions about everything. It was great, but kind of daunting at the same time. But overall, really, really cool trip.
Nice. So what was your number one takeaway for Cast Us?
I cannot talk about
can
my
share.
number one takeaway. It is super secret, but it's going to be awesome when it happens.
Secret.
Yeah. No, it's a.
You could tell me, but then you'd have to kill the entire audience.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay,
it is it's definitely a marketing initiative that is just really, really different than what we've done before. So I will report on it in a couple weeks.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll wait with bated breath until then.
Yep. So there was this blog post from maybe like one of the OGs, the original gangsters of like transparency in the startup world, Alex Turnbull from Groove, where he talked about all these things and situations that almost kind of wrecked his $500,000 MRR business. And so I thought, Dave, we could kind of walk through the blog post. Will definitely link up in the show notes because it's amazing. But maybe just kind of talk through some of the things that he felt like he learned along the way, and kind of how they righted the ship, and maybe, for us, maybe things that we would all do different next time.
Yeah, and before we dive into that, let me just give a little bit of background on Alex. If you're not familiar with Alex Turnbull and Groove. Groove is a help desk software. It's a SaaS product that's basically similar to Help Scout. It's a competitor to Help Scout and Zendesk and Freshdesk and some others. And Alex started blogging about this, I want to say 2013, 2014, something like that. And they really made a name for themselves based on the quality of their content marketing. And, I would see that these articles would regularly get shared on Hacker News. And so after a while, I just started signing up for the email list. And then, of course, when I was building my own help desk, I was paying attention very closely to things that Alex had learned and pitfalls that they had run into, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was a really great thing to follow along with. Also, he was tracking the MRR as they would change it every month. And then all of a sudden, mysteriously in 2017, they kind of just dropped off the face of the planet. Like, I stopped hearing updates from Alex. We stopped getting new content marketing on there. There were some guys that were working for Groove that were content marketing guys. They had left, and the whole blog just kind of went quiet. Well, recently, now we know why. It's because in 2017, Alex started having this massive crisis. And what he's now talking about on his blog is basically what that crisis was about, what it caused them to do, how they had to rethink everything. And the first thing that really sort of blew me away about all of this, Craig, is that, first of all, I didn't remember, when they sort of shut off the revenue tracking, but I want to say they were making like, I don't know, $200K a month or something like that, which is just ridiculous. I mean, that's awesome. Like, I would love to get to that level of scale. But then all of a sudden they're like, well, now we're at $500K a month. So that's a $6 million a year business. And, he was talking about how unhappy he was, how stuck they were, how their previous culture had basically mired them into this position, and it made it very difficult for them to get out. They didn't really have the right people in the right places. And like all this stuff came together for this massive, perfect storm. And he was ready to drop the whole fucking thing, like right then and there. And that, as soon as I read that, and his Twitter thread on there before he posted the blog post, just made my jaw hit the floor.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was reading the Twitter thread, like, first thing in the morning, I was like, oh my God. And the next one, oh my God. The next one, oh my God, I can't believe it. Because, I mean, he's a really transparent guy and shares a lot of his emotions in this post in particular, I think. But I mean, I can imagine, I can't relate, but I can imagine, saying like, okay, I built this whole business and it's about to fall down, and it's everything I can do to just hold it up for another day. Because I mean, I've been there, like, man, like Podcast Motor in the early days, we're growing like a lot and had no idea how to put the processes in place to scale and to support our customers. And I mean, he talks about in this blog post a lot, like letting your customers down and doing it so visibly like he is just got to be like worse than failing, because then you're like, I'm successful, but I kind of wish I wasn't, because then, all these troubles we're having wouldn't be so tough.
Yeah, and he even opened up the conversation saying, your investors and your board and the people on your, your advisors and things like that all say you should never publicly share this stuff. And he said, "Fuck it, I'm going to do it anyway." Like that right there, I appreciate, because the insight into this is really, it's super helpful if you're struggling as a founder and you've seen some success, but then you hit that plateau and you just don't know where to go with it. Like, you're struggling to get off the plateau. You talk to people, they offer ideas, the ideas aren't working. And sometimes it's just, you gotta revisit everything from the ground up. And that's a painful thing to do, because you're basically saying everything that we've done up to this point needs to start over.
Mm-hmm.
And that sucks.
Mm-hmm.
That sucks, because that investment is not cheap. One of the things he said in his most recent blog post, he said they spent in total over $1 million trying to revamp everything to make this a platform that could move forward, and restructuring the team and setting priorities, changing feature sets, and all of it. $1 million. They had to invest $1 million in that. Now, of course, that's a sixth of his year of their total revenue, but that hurts. And that's just not something that, he's going to be pulling out of their bank account, that's sitting there fat, dumb, and happy. Yeah. You're investing much of what you have in that coming MRR into the business. And so, this personally hurt him to do this.
Mm-hmm. I love so he has this quote, says, "Being scrappy is great when you're just starting out and have no other choice, but scrappiness doesn't scale. As your business matures, you'll pay for your earlier scrappiness, and you'll need to be much more thoughtful and forward-looking with your decisions." And I can imagine a lot of people listening to the show that are in similar boats to you and I, Dave, are like, yep, they're just nodding their heads like, yep, I'm digging my own grave right now, or I've dug my own grave before. And no, you gotta face the music sometime. Because I think that, like, unless you're venture funded, like really venture funded, you're gonna cut corners because you have to, just to get to market and just to sell something at the wrong price point, or selling the wrong product or the wrong version of the product to the wrong people, and all these things that you have to try to like pivot through and away from, like, as gracefully as possible. But yeah, I think all of these things have like this, he talks about technical debt, but I think there's all sorts of like cultural debt and customer fit debt and all this kind of stuff that you get yourself in the wrong boat early because you have to. And then like to pivot out of it, I think is tough, because it's not like I'm going to spend this $1 million or these months of effort, but it's not changing the top line or the bottom line today. It's months and months from now that, like, okay, we're just going to rebuild the whole app, or we're going to fire the whole marketing team because they're not attracting the kind of customers we want. Or
they're not, they're not executing to a plan, or they don't know how to make a plan, or they're not there to provide the leadership to generate a plan.
Yeah.
Like all of these things that could go wrong in there. And, that's one of the things. So one of his things in the first blog post really sort of hit home for me about one of the lessons learned that he had at the bottom. We didn't have the discipline to execute quickly. And I am feeling this pain right now, not with Recapture, because I think we're doing pretty well with that. It's one developer, it's me. We have a number of customers that are coming in asking for features that were sort of on a mental roadmap that I had. And basically their requests are just prioritizing that roadmap. So I feel like that is kind of set in place and we're executing to that okay. But with the plugins, I feel like we've been mired, especially with Business Directory plugin. We have enough support that it basically keeps one developer busy all the time and one support person busy all the time. But if I were to take the remainder of the money out of the plugin, I can't hire another developer who works on just features to move this whole thing forward. And it used to be that I had a couple of guys that were senior, and they were able to, balance that to a certain extent. But after a while, I could see them slowly petering out to a point where they couldn't add as many features because they were awash in support. And so there's a discipline about executing quickly and prioritizing. And I'm struggling trying to make this work in the plugins with guys that are like mid-level engineers, at this point. They're not junior, but they're not really senior either. And getting them to internally think about priorities and to say, all right, I'm going to spend X% of my time on features this week and the rest of it on support, and try to get the support out there. It's like a lot of us are so crisis driven, whatever's the loudest customer, the biggest fire, whatever, that's what we're going to focus on and put out. And it takes an extraordinary amount of discipline to actually say, all right, you know what? I'm going to spend 40% of time on features and 60% of time on support. So when I put out all the top fires here in that 60%, which I'm going to say is, this many hours, I'm going to put that aside and I'm going to start working on features.
Yeah.
Like that's hard to be able, because, support is constantly banging on the door. When is this going to happen? Well, this customer is asking for an update. Who's supposed to be getting this done over here? That's tough. That's really tough. And I don't have a good answer on how to fix that aside from hiring, but I don't have the money to hire somebody who could really execute to that and have the discipline, because it's like a 3x increase on the salary I could afford, probably. Mm-hmm. So that's tough. I don't know how to fix that.
I think you probably never have enough resources, people, time, money, whatever it is, because as your business grows, you're going to expect more out of everything. And so it's just, I think unless you can always prioritize this to be right, then you're going to be kind of forever, a person away, or, a month away from having that feature done or whatever. Or from being able to execute like you want. You're always going to be 20% late or something. Because we very much feel this too. Is it's never, nothing is ever fast enough. Nothing is ever right the first time. He talks about this a little bit in the article. Like, and we've come a long way in this respect of like planning out our month and trying to stick with it as best we can. But the reality is, like, we're a young company. We're 2 years old. We have to be really, really nimble, because the most important thing is not the same, like, throughout the month, even sometimes, So like if you're so rigid to say, like, this is the thing for this month and we're going to do this, and the engineers are going to do some support, that's cool. But then, like, whatever, your API breaks to your main integration, you got to go fix that API. And I think stuff like that just happens all the time. I don't know. Maybe we just are a shitty company, and so stuff like that just happens all the time to us. But I talk to enough other people to where I don't think that is the case. I think that everyone that is, say, doing less than $100,000 a month in MRR is just sitting there waiting every day for something to happen to where they have to pivot into this. And maybe that's where they were, and they got past it, right? Because they were doing $500,000 a month or something like that, and their culture didn't change. But I look at like Basecamp. They plan these 6-month cycles, and they're planning the next 6-month cycle when the first one starts. So they're planning like 12 weeks away. There is no effing way that we could plan six weeks away and be in touch with our customers at all. But I think you need some scope and some size to be able to have that information and be confident.
One of the weird things that my freelance client does right now, so each of the teams, they're all agile teams, and you get to decide like how long your sprint is. And so we've tried some longer sprints, and now we're working on a shorter sprint. It's like a 2-week sprint. So we're spending literally 10% of our time every sprint on all of the sprint ceremonies. So you really only have like 90% available to work. But then that doesn't include like all the weird meetings that happen in the company and other side discussions and design this and do that. So there's really no strategic thinking time, and everything becomes very reactionary. So like something will come up on the support, and then they're like, okay, this got to happen today. Like half of our story points on any given sprint are allocated to support. Mm-hmm. So if you're already taking away half of your team's velocity on that sprint just to deal with issues, and then on top of all that, you've got all this overhead stuff in there, it ends up squeezing the strategic stuff. So I'm seeing that the strategic discussions are now infrequent, And when they do happen, they'll happen piecemeal where you only get through part of what you really needed to do. And nobody can like sit down and say, if we're going to make this happen by December 31st, here's how we have to back solve to get there. Like, it's not to say that I want to go back to a waterfall method, because that has its own set of problems. But at the same time, it's like they're too agile at this point. And I see that, we kind of end up in the same way with the plugins. We're more reactive than proactive. And then when we try to be proactive, the support kind of squeezes out that strategic piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to this, but it is, we talked about this in our weekly meeting this week. Someone brought up like, hey, do we have a way to really like find out what the big picture is for this month or this cycle and keep it in the front of everyone's mind, and then build the smaller, stories or whatever around that? And the answer for us is no. And I think even if we did, you would need some flexibility in there to say like, okay, this is the big picture. We're like 70% sure this is the right, the big picture, but there's a 30% chance we're going to pivot from it. Or maybe you build in some buffer to say like, this is the big picture and we're only going to plan to work on this, 70% of the time. 30% is going to be for fires to put out and bugs and stuff like that. I think kind of intuitively, I think that's kind of how we think about it, is to say like, you really don't have 6 or 8 development hours in the day. You have 4 or 5, and the rest are spent doing other stuff that just has to get done, but you have no idea what that's going to be when you start a cycle.
Right. And Groove just ultimately fell into a category of everybody was, kind of doing their own thing, and there wasn't like this overarching strategy of what they should be heading towards or doing. It was, this team is trying to address this issue, and this team is working on support, and this team is thinking about this. And Alex, as the non-technical founder, didn't kind of have a handle on all of that. And so the whole fucking thing came down. I mean, well, that's not really fair. It really ground to a halt. I think that's really more of where they ground to a standstill, where they just weren't able to make forward progress on anything because they had accumulated all of these internal debts, cultural, technical, structural. They didn't have the right people that were executing on the right things and people thinking about the right stuff. And, that's, oh God, that was so painful to read. It really was just absolutely painful. I mean, you made a comment about, the Twitter thread made you want to cry. And I just had this horrible pit in my stomach when I'm going through this, thinking, what would I have been doing if I sat down with my wife and had that exact same conversation that he had, making $500,000 a month? I'm ready to walk away from this, honey, and my wife would be like, "See, the fuck you are." And just letting that all come out, right? Like, just have this huge weight on your shoulders, man. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can't imagine. And I think it, like, to me, like, it kind of resonates because, there are times when you're super busy and you're not effective. And there's other times when you're not so busy and you're really effective. And for me, because I've 100% been in both of those places. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that right now I'm in one of those busy and not effective times a little bit. But it's because I'm not organized. I don't have a lot of communication and like clear expectations with the people I work with, so that like I am wanting to do all this stuff and like that's not really clear to everybody, and I'm not doing the things to enable them to be successful. And so you're the one that just shoulders all of the responsibility. You have to do all the work. You make all the delegations and all the decisions, and you can only be so productive and effective like that because you're just one person. You have 8 hours in a day or whatever, and you're just like holding the ship up like by yourself, and so you feel stressful and like you're not doing anything, and that's the worst possible combination. As opposed to like I'm thinking at a really high level, talking with our team members who are executing and planning everything, and I'm just here as like a sounding board. Like that's the opposite end of the spectrum, and I think that's probably where they got in the end, is where he kind of was able to rise above a lot of this stuff. And I have to say, man, I think we've gotten lucky a little bit with this, and maybe a little bit smart, but probably more lucky. Is I think this is where like hiring senior talent really comes in, to say like, here are the keys, just go make it happen. And if you can afford to pay for those people, I think a lot of this responsibility on us as like an owner gets easier because you can just pay somebody twice what you have to pay a junior person, but know that they pretty much take care of a lot of these pieces of responsibility that you would have to shoulder otherwise.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no question. One of the best decisions I ever made in Recapture was to hire somebody who was a senior Node.js engineer, and he also knew React and other stuff, and he's just unbelievable. When he came out of the project, I think he knew some stuff about AWS and Redis and other technologies that we had in there, but he's become the resident expert on all of this, how it all integrates. When we have a problem, I just basically have to say, hey, Mike, this is going wrong over here. What's wrong? And within, a few minutes, he'll come back to me and say, all right, so I saw this and we have this and, we need to change this right now, but I've, fixed this and we pushed a patch out to the cluster over here and it's doing this. Like, I just feel 100% comfortable that shit gets handled. And I don't have to intervene, but I used to feel that way with the plugins. I don't feel that way anymore. Not with the new crop of developers that are in there. And it's not a knock against them. It's just they're at a different place than the other guys were. And it's going to take them a while to get there, and they will get there. But you're investing in them. And as a result, if you're paying that lower rate, that investment means there's going to be hiccups. There's going to be problems. You're going to have issues. And you've got to patiently go through those issues, and you have to be willing to do that. But if you're willing to pay more, you get the benefit of that experience and things just get handled, but you have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny. I haven't read the second article yet, but I'll be interested to hear what the way they came out of this looked like.
Well, it's really, not to burst your bubble or anything, but it's
not that good.
It didn't really Well, it's not that it's not that good. It's that he didn't basically say, all right, this is how we got out of it 100%. He was still just sort of talking about the challenges that they had to make in order to scale up, the things that they had to fix. And, they're all pretty important things in there, but they're definitely stuff that I would say that they're more applicable to larger startups, a little bit bigger than where we're at now, because he's got a staff. And then, like, for example, making tough personnel decisions. How many personnel do you have? If you have a marketing person and a developer and yourself, there aren't a lot of tough personnel decisions to make there. You either made the right call or you didn't make the right call, and they're working out or they're not working out. But when you have a team, like you have a marketing team, and then there's like 3 or 4 people, then you have to figure out, are they all carrying their load? What is it that the marketing team needs to address? Do the people on the marketing team have the skills to address that problem effectively? Yep. Is there somebody that can lead that effort? Have they really taken the time and effort to be that leader? There's just a lot of different questions that you ask when you have those team dynamics at play. And that's more or less what this article was talking about, was stuff like that. It was very interesting and very heart-wrenching to hear that, he had to part ways with some team leads that had worked with Groove for a very long time because he had tough choices to make. And there were specific roles he needed, and restructuring that basically said, we're not going to have these scrappy silos sitting all out here. We're going to have people organized in a certain way with structure and hierarchy and, things that were very antithetical to the original Groove hypothesis of being this scrappy little startup. So, yeah, it's interesting to see how your culture has to shift. And, they brought in an outside consultant, this woman called Elizabeth O'Neill, who was very helpful in identifying what are the core issues that are there and how can we address those and what do the shifts look like and what things are going to work and what things you probably want to avoid. I don't even know how many people physically work at Groove, but for a $6 million a year company, I have to imagine that there's somewhere in the 20 range, 15, somewhere between 10 and 20. So, those 10 or 20 people are going to have to be really, really effective. And so you're making some really tough decisions to figure out who's the right person for this role. Do the people I have fit the skills that are needed for this role? Could we level them up, or do we have to hire from outside? And if somebody isn't really fitting, do I have to let them go? And, building startups sucks when you have personal relationships with these people and you get to a point where you're like, this isn't where we need right now. We don't need you and your skill set, but it's not personal to you. I mean, that, firing somebody really sucks. So,
yeah, the thing that I really appreciate about this article and this type of conversation is like, there's a lot of like, how I made my first 1,000 or how I got to 10,000 MRR or whatever. And that's really great, but it's been talked about a lot. And I think conversations like this of like, okay, so I'm at 10 or 20,000 or 500,000 or whatever he's at, what are the things that are going to be different from, 20,000 to 100,000 or 100,000 to 1,000,000 that I don't think about or that I don't know, because that's kind of like the next phase of the journey for a lot of folks is like, okay, I got started, I'm off the ground, I was scrappy. Now, like, I need to build a real company with processes and expectations, and I need to look at like, are the people that got us here not going to be the people that can get us there, kind of things. And that's, emotionally really hard, tough to even realize that those are questions you have to ask yourself. But yeah, really important questions, even early on, even if you're not there yet, but just like to be conscious of the fact that like, okay, this day is probably going to come. And like, if I'm aware of that up front, can I save myself some pain later on? I don't know. I think about this a fair amount. Like, are the decisions we're making today going to come back and bite us in the ass later? If the answer is like, yeah, and it's not too painful, then I'll probably do it if it's like the best thing for today. But I am trying to have like a long-term strategy with a lot of decisions I make now, so we don't have to go make them again later on. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, that ship has sailed for me with the plugins. Certain decisions were made a long time ago, and we did it for the sake of expediency. And I have a competitor that's going a little bit different direction at this point, sort of embracing the whole Gutenberg block thing. And I kind of said, well, we're going to hold off and not do that right away. And so far that decision has paid off because there's just not tons and tons of people that are looking for that. And I'm not hearing people come in and say, why the hell doesn't Business Directory support blocks, But I will at some point. If this gets big enough, then I'm going to hear that. And when I do, then it's going to be too late, right? So it's one of those things, but it's a lot of effort for us to go and rework that. And I know our competitors spent a good year reworking their stuff to make that happen. And, if it took them a year, it'll probably take us more because they have multiple developers on their team working and I've got one. So yeah, it's going to be painful and that's going to suck. So yeah, it's going to be one of those questions. Do I just start over, go from the ground up at that point and say, here's the new version? Or do we try to actually migrate what we have, or have a plan that says we're going to migrate the listings? We're going to take the listings in this format and we'll bring them over here and we'll bring them into this new thing. I don't know. Do I even want to invest in that at all? Do I want to sell this to somebody else and let that be their problem? I think ideally I would love to sell the plugins to somebody who was like a WordPress developer, because they could get the most benefit out of it. They wouldn't need to have the developers on board unless they wanted them to just handle the support stuff. And then they could get direct benefit out of it by handling, the code requests and the feature changes and stuff, and take the money out as kind of a paycheck. But if you're trying to like hire a developer to do this, the economics of this get a little weird, and it's harder to really make it profitable. So
yeah. One thing I've realized recently is to that effect that like a lot of us play in this pretty dangerous space with our businesses of, they're making $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 a month, which is a really good business or a really good job for us all to have, right? Because without us, all these businesses would just go away. But when you get to like $40,000 or $50,000 a month, you can have the people and the quality of people, and you can invest the time in the processes to where these businesses run without you. And you can take the time to invest in things like rebuilding the plugin for Gutenberg, and it won't kill you. But yeah, man, early on, like we all are, you're still in the pain. You're in the pain house of like, okay, we got to just make this work until it doesn't, or until we get to the point like the promised land where, we have enough time and people and mental energy that you have as a founder to take a step back and say, okay, this is what it's going to be, and this is how we're going to get there, and have the team execute that because I mean, right now we're all just in like survival mode, and that's just what it has to be, I think. So I don't feel too bad about it. But the promised land, from what I hear, is definitely on the other side of the fence, and like I think that's when growing the business gets actually kind of easier because you have the people and the levers to pull. Whereas now, especially like we're all kind of relatively new, it's just like these little incremental wins that we have. So.
I don't know. I don't believe such a utopian vision. I think the promised land is always like that rainbow.
It's one
if you're
more
trying
step
to chase
away.
the end of the rainbow to find the pot of the gold and start digging, you're never going to find it, man. You just have to, you enjoy whatever's happening now. You take whatever challenges are happening now, and you do the best to plan ahead so you don't get bitten by all that stuff in the future. But I don't think there's ever, based on everything that I've heard with other conversations, blog posts, discussions, masterminds, there is something that always vexes you at any level of revenue that you're making. It's, my uncle once said to me, getting rich, and my uncle was by no means wealthy, but compared to my family growing up, he was actually doing really well. And I heard him say to me one time, he said, getting more money doesn't fix your problems. It just changes their magnitude.
Yep.
And I think that's 100% true in business. Yep. You're making $10,000 a month, you have $10,000 a month problems. You go to $100,000 a month, now you have $100,000 a month problems. And they're very different than $10,000 a month problems. And they suck in totally different ways than $100,000 a month problems. And that's what I keep hearing consistently. Like, there is no utopia. You're just going to change piles of shit. And on that happy note, I think we should wrap it up for this week.
That's a perfect ending to the episode. I love it.
Yes. So we want to hear what you think. Was there something that really resonated with you about Alex's article? Was there something that we said pissed you off or made you think? We'd love to hear about it. Send us an email, podcast@roguestartups.com. And as always, our one ask is, if you feel like we've been helpful to you, share us with a friend, a colleague, somebody in your mastermind group, random person on the street. Let them know about our podcast if you think it'll help them too. Until next week.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Rogue Startups. If you haven't already, head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the show. For show notes from each episode and a few extra resources to help you along your journey, head over to roguestartups.com to learn more.